praise him, ever in joyful song. Amen.
All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. It is good to see everybody. Some of you looked at me a little surprised when you saw me. I thought you were supposed to be taking a break. Well, I am supposed to be taking a break, but I missed you guys. Actually, we had a little mix-up, so God was supposed to be here, couldn't make it, and so I'm back. But I will continue my break next week. Interestingly enough, this was really a good time for this to happen. God always makes things happen in his time for his reason, because we're getting ready to start into a new series that we're going to take probably the rest of the year to get through, talking about being the salt of the earth and being the light of the world. And the first part is being the salt of the earth. What does that actually mean? What does it mean to be the salt of the earth? Like, why would the example, why would the use of salt even be appropriate when making reference to how we are to behave, how we are to have an impact on the world around us as God's church? But before we get into that, I want to take the time to kind of get us prepared, kind of a little introductory course, if you will, a little, prep, a little seasoning, because very often when we start looking at things that pertain to us and more specifically our impact on others, it's kind of like, if somebody, tells you they want you to do something. I want you to go out here and, shovel the snow. I want you to go out here and do this work. You say, well, okay, I need to prepare myself, right? You say, I might need some gloves, or I might need to get my glasses. I need to, pull my hair back. Whatever it is you have to do, you have to prepare yourself. And so as we go into this, it's very important that we apply these things to our lives, that we look at the ways in which we need to grow or change, what we need to focus in on to be of use in God's kingdom. But I want to start us out by preparing us. And some of that preparation, it isn't just gathering the proper tools and materials all the time. It's not always, making sure you have the right apparel, or, it's not just getting your gloves and your helmet. Sometimes it's attitude. Sometimes it's just a matter of making sure that, you do the, what they say, the checkup from the neck up. You take the time to make sure that mentally that you're in a place where you really, truly understand that my attitude matters. And so I want to look at attitude today in a very specific way. The title of the sermon today is The Perfect Storm. The Perfect Storm. Now, I borrowed this title from a movie, actually. It started as a book by a guy named Sebastian Junger, I believe was his last name. But they made it into this movie, and it was actually based on a true story. Some of you probably have seen the movie. It's called The Perfect Storm. It was George Clooney, Mark Wahlberg, right? And, okay, this is the brief, 15-second version. Basically, these guys, they're fishermen, they're professionals, and they're used to storms, but this storm in particular was different because it basically was the convergence of 3 storms that all kind of came together at the exact same time. And as they were coming together, their little boat just happened to be right there where all these storms converged, right? And, it kind of chronicled all these different, people. But as you watch the movie, and I haven't seen it in a long time, it came out in 2000. In fact, they even made another movie. It was kind of a knockoff version. My wife, she said, this is terrible. He hated it. But the original was pretty good. But it talks about each one of these people, and it wasn't just the storm. It wasn't just the danger that the storm presented. But as you watch the movie, you see the different characters, how each one responded to the storm, how each one looked at it a little bit differently. And when we face storms in our life, when we're presented with that perfect storm in our life, it's how we respond to it that makes a huge difference as to whether or not we can not only help ourselves, but be able to help other people. But it's not the size of the storm, right? Our attitude changes. Our attitude is impacted not by the size of the storm, not by the convergence of all of this chaos, but do we really trust God that he's there with us in the storm? I want to start by looking at 1 John chapter 4, because when we really get down to the storms that we face in life, the different things that impact us, it can really come down to one thing if we're honest. 1 John chapter 4, verse 13, we'll start there. It says, "This is how we know that we live in him and he in us. He has given us of his Spirit. And we have seen and testified that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. If anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in them and they in God. And so we know and rely on the love God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. This is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. In this world, we are like Jesus. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. We love because he first loved us. Whoever claims to love God yet hates a brother or sister is a liar, for whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command: anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister." This is probably, if not the top, this is definitely top 5, one of my favorite passages in the entire Bible. Because it's made so clear here, and it's very direct. It lets us know that if we are to be like God, if we're to be made in the image of Christ, that we are to be just like him in this world. The things that he did, the way that his outlook, his perspective, that we are to share in that same thing. But it tells us something very clear. It's like, you don't have to guess if a person is truly living like Christ, if they've really got God's Spirit that's guiding them and living them. Why? Because we'll know. It's easy to see, not only anybody, but it's easy to see in yourself. If you truly love God, it's making it clear here that you will also love your brothers and your sisters. But what I kind of want to zero in on here is it's in verse 18, where he talks about that perfect love that drives out fear. You think, what does it mean for something to be fearless? Someone to be fearless. And what is this perfect thing? So I kind of want to unwrap this. We'll do a little exegesis here. What is this perfect love that is talking about? You think, how can somebody love you in a perfect way? How can you understand something to be perfect? Because we're so imperfect, it's important we look at this. In this context, the word perfect was translated to mean more about completion, something actually being done. So it's kind of like if I say, hey, Dennis, I'm getting ready to go out here, and if you don't mind, I need you to move these chairs over here by the time I get back. And that's like 10 minutes later, I'll be back, right? So Dennis gets up. He's not going to do it, but if he did, if he was willing, he would get up, and these 5 chairs, he would get these chairs, and he might take them one by one, and line them up. And then he might look at it and he might say, oh, this isn't right. This is right. Now, here's the thing. When I come back 10 minutes later, when I walk in and I see that Dennis did exactly what it is that I asked him to do, I look at that and I think he completed the task. It is done. He did exactly what it was that I expected him to do. So in this context, when it's talking about perfect and his perfect love, what it's describing here is that God has come through and he has demonstrated his love, and it's perfect in that he has always done exactly what he said he's going to do. That we can see that. We can actually go back and look. Just like I could come in here 10 minutes later and I could see that Dennis moved those 5 chairs and put them exactly where I asked him to do it. I can see the same thing with God in my life. That he has done exactly what he said he's going to do. That's that perfect love that he's talking about. The fact that we can trust that God is in control. And so when it talks about a perfect love driving out fear, what it's saying is God is faithful. He always does. He always loves us. He always comes through the way that he's supposed to come through. Why would we have fear if we know that God is in control? Why would we ever have fear? So when we go through those storms in life, when we go through those challenges, why would we ever reasonably have a reason to sit back and have fear when we know what that perfect love is? We've seen that perfect love. The Spirit of God gives us both the ability to be like Christ and to be fearless. And that fearlessness is not just this bravado and this, sense of bravery and reckless abandon. No, it is a fearlessness that says, you know what? I know who's with me. I know who sent me. I know what it is that I'm expected to do. Now, let's just say, for example, we'll carry out the analogy. I don't have any money, but let's say I said I was going to pay Dennis $5 to move those chairs. $1 for each chair, right? 5 chairs, $1 each chair. That sound fair? Dennis is like, no. Yeah. Okay, Dennis, I'll take it. Fine. All right. Now, here's the thing. If I have a track record and I say, hey, Dennis, the last 50 times I asked Dennis to do something, and I paid him exactly what I said, and I paid him on time, and I gave him correct change, and he never had to worry. Guess what? Dennis can be confident and fearless and completely willing to do what he was asked to do. Why? Because he's proven what he said. Every time he's done it. When it talks about perfect love, that's what it's talking about here. That we serve a God who's perfect. That we have no reason to guess. We have no reason to doubt. We have no reason to look back and wonder. We can be fearless. We can be bold. We can be confident. We can be that salt of the earth. We can be the light of the world. Why? Because we know the God that we serve. We know who it is that is giving us this expectation, this mandate, these set of requirements and things that he's asking us to do. We know he's going to come through every single time. Interesting, the movie, as it went through all these different characters and how they were responding to the storm, I remember thinking to myself a couple times, like, you know what? I don't know if it's because I'm just not a professional fisherman and I've never been in a squall, maybe I've just never seen it up front. I was like, there was a couple of the characters that were very, they were responding and they were focused. I'm thinking I couldn't do it. I've just been sitting there crying. I've just been sitting there. It kind of, and we're going to look at this in a second, it made me think about how when Jonah was, just sitting there sleeping. And it's like, they're like, how can you sleep? I'm thinking, how can you be so calm? How can you be so peaceful? How can you maintain this fearlessness, this attitude? How can you stay in this space and keep looking forward and stay focused when there's so much chaos going on around you? We had this going on this week, flu shots. Went to go get shots, and William, I got the report back. I wasn't there for this, but William, he took it like a man. He's growing up. I'm proud of him. Kendall, she's like, not so much. I mean, it was really. I heard it was a big deal. I heard there was a lot of tears and yelling, and there was some stuff. And what's interesting about kids getting shots is that if you really thought about it, you can't expect a 7-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old. You can't expect them to, be able to reason it this way. But why would your father or your mother who loves you put you through something that isn't beneficial for you, that isn't ultimately going to be for your good? And yet, like William was kind of like the first line. This was Kendall, right? It required some assistance. I don't guess they had straps or anything. It was they had a clinic at the school. But, surprised. She does a little better than that. But I guess the needle was bigger. I think she saw her brother go through it first. And it was interesting because had William handled it a little bit better, I think it may have gone a little bit better with William. Because sometimes somebody's watching you and they're looking to see how you're reacting to that needle, and they're thinking, oh my, But when you think about when we go through things that are going to be tough or even painful, nobody considers getting a flu vaccine or any vaccine. Nobody gives a child a vaccine out of malice, out of ill will, out of a wish to do harm. They do it for your good. They do it for the good of all those other people who are going to be around you, so that not only do you not get sick, but you don't spread something to them. And so the idea is we understand this about something like immunizations and shots and vaccines. But what's so important that we understand, if we're going to be the salt of the earth, if we're going to be able to have an impact on people and show them who God really is, we kind of have to remember this. We have to remember that it's God that put us in this place. That he's right there with us. It doesn't matter how dark the hallway is. It doesn't matter how big the needle is. God's not going to let anything happen to you that's going to harm you. Even if it may feel painful at the time. Even if it may look scary. Even if it's insurmountably bigger than you. It's not insurmountable to God. I want to finish up here in Mark chapter 4. We're going to actually look at an example of a storm. Something that we can probably all relate to. Starting in verse 35. That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with them. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to the disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." We see this example, and it's so important that we look at this for what it was, because it's easy for us to kind of, look at this and where he says, "Do you still have no faith?" And we're kind of like, in our nice, comfortable chairs, and they're like, "Yeah, man, they were really faithless." How could you be so faithless? Jesus is right there with you. Clearly, he wasn't going to let you drown. Why could you even ask such a question of Christ? But I want you to think about yourself for a minute. I want you to think about the scenario here that's going on. Jesus has just got done teaching, giving a bunch of parables, preaching all the people to a point where, his humanity, he's like, hey, I think I need to go take a nap. I need to go get some rest, right? And he goes to get some rest. He takes a nap. Says he had a pillow. I don't know what kind it was, but whatever it was, it allowed him to sleep. And so he's sleeping, and the waves are coming. A squall, Squall is not just a normal little thunderstorm and, the waves are getting kind of rough. A squall, meaning that it was actually tipping the boats. It was actually moving these structures to where trained fishermen, men who spent their whole lives out there on the water fishing, got concerned. They themselves were afraid. It's kind of like, I think to myself, you ever been in one of those situations where you think, okay, something's going on, and then you see the police. You think, okay, it's all under control, right? But if the police start running, you might think, ooh, that's bad. Maybe I should start running too. If the police are afraid, and they're trained to be there, if the firefighters are running out of the building, man, it must be pretty serious. That's what we have here. These trained fishermen were afraid. That's how bad the water was. I don't want us to lose sight of just how bad this squall was. And yet, even in the face of that, Jesus says to them, do you still have no faith? He didn't ask them, say, well, you guys are supposed to be fishermen. You're supposed to be the best of the best. How could you possibly be scared of the storm? No, it's clearly understandable for them to be afraid of these waves that are rocking the boat and rushing over. It's clearly understandable. What he does is he appeals to their faith. He's like, do you really think I would let you drown? I'm right here with you. When we go through storms in our life, when we see challenges, this is not to say that your challenges aren't real. Those challenges going on in your marriage, those are real storms. That health condition, that disease that you're battling with right now, that is a real storm. That's a real problem. That is something that should concern you. When you're facing eviction, when you're facing job loss, when your money isn't right, those are real storms. But Jesus isn't even focused on the storm. He's not telling them, how could you possibly, look at this real situation in your life and be afraid. He's appealing to their faith. He's saying, no matter how real that is, do you not recognize that I'm right here with you? Do you see that Christ is right there with you in the storm? Notice what he said right before that, as they were going over, to kind of get away from the crowd. It says there were other boats there too. Sometimes that really perfect storm where three storms are converging in your life, and it's not just your money, but it's also your health. It's not just your money and your health, but it's also something going on with one of your children. All those things are happening at once. That perfect storm is happening, but it's happening for the purpose of faith. It's happening so that other people can see. Those other boats, the ones who weren't as close to Jesus, the ones who they were just out there on the periphery, they had to see that Jesus had power over the wind and the waves as well. When we're going through our storms, when we're going through our challenges, it's not just about us and what we're dealing with. Someone has to see us reach for Jesus' hand. Someone has to see that we are fearless because we have Christ. Because God never lets us down. And he's never going to let us drown while we're with him. Fear of our circumstances comes when we forget who's in the boat with us. We forget that God wants other people, including you, but he wants other people to see just how faithful he is. He wants other people. He needs other people to see him calm the storm in your life. That's why you have the storm. It should not cause us to be afraid. It should cause us to reach for him. It should cause us to want to be closer to him. We become the salt of the earth and the light of the world. And people know who Christ is through his church. But in order for us to represent the church, in order for us to be able to effectively show people who Christ is, we have to first deal with our own attitude and deal with our own fears and look at the situations that are going on with us and give it to God. Not just in some cliche type of way, say, okay, well, I prayed about it and I moved on. No, again, these are real issues. If you got problems, if you're going in for a blood transfusion 3 times a week, or if you're going in for dialysis, or if you're, dealing with your heart, or you're dealing with your lungs, you're dealing with cancer, these are real things that you deal with on an ongoing basis. It's not just for you, okay, I'm just going to pray about it, and then I'm just going to, go on. No. It's real. It's there. The storms are still, coming and the water's still crashing over. But do you remember who's in the boat with you? Do you remember, as those of us who have accepted Christ, that we have his Spirit? That he's using that storm to represent something to people who do not know who he is? I'll close with a few questions here. Do I believe that my storm, and I put storm in quotes there because everybody's storm is a little bit different, right? Do I believe that my storm in life is bigger than my God, or that my God is bigger than my storm? Pretty self-explanatory there. Because we can't be the salt of the earth. We can't go have an impact on people who are lost and don't know who God is if we can't have faith in who God is. If we can't remember that God is going to always bring us through. Do we actually believe that God is bigger than that storm? Because we know it intellectually. We understand it intellectually. If God created the entire universe, all these galaxies and stars and black holes and all these amazing things that happen in space, and we understand the tides and climate and everything that goes on around us, we see these seasons change every year. Some of you have seen a few more seasons than me, right? You've seen it happen every year. You know the leaves are about to start turning colors. You see this. You understand that God is over the tides and he's over the climate. He's over the season changing. But do you believe he's bigger than that storm that's going on with you right now? I thought about that. It was interesting. I kind of looked over here and I thought about just again how I remember driving. This was several months back. I remember driving up to Philadelphia. Went to go see Trifina when she was in the hospital. She had that aneurysm. And it was interesting. The whole story and the way it worked out, how she just so happened to be going in for something else. And that's when they found that really hard, bed where they had to go in there and correct that. And so they had to go in and start, cutting into, anytime you start cutting into somebody's head, that's scary, And she was like, but God will work it out, and she's praying about it. Miss Mary's praying about it, and, Alan's praying about it. As a church, we're praying about it. Here's the thing. In that moment, see, we can look back on it now because that was, earlier this year. That was a long time ago. All her hair's grown back from where they had to cut it off and stuff, So it's all good now. But in that moment, when they're like, hey, I'm about to cut on your head. In fact, I remember I was thinking to myself kind of like, I guess this is normal. Because I remember she said, yeah, but they're going to wait a few weeks. And I thought, ooh, they can't do it now? No, they're going to wait a few. I'm thinking, ooh, that's scary. The fact that now you got days and weeks on end that I've got it every day. Think about the fact that they're going to do something. I can sit here and have a stroke right now. But they're going to do something weeks from now to correct it, and that in and of itself, I might not make it through. We look back on it now, but here's the thing. Just like that was a storm for her, and we all witnessed it, and we all saw God bring her through it. What can't he bring you through in your life? What is it that you're facing that you can't get through, that God is not faithful, that other people will not be inspired? Because, I'm sure at your feet at night, she wasn't thinking about me when she was praying. But guess what? I'm sure she was praying for me. But I'm saying in that moment, I'm sure she was thinking about her own situation. But guess what? She was having an impact on my faith by the way she was trusting God. Do we have that same attitude about God? What does perfect love mean to me? And how does it apply to my life and my relationship with God? This idea of perfect love, what does that mean to you? What does it mean for a love that is complete? How has God completed his love at every turn with you? How has he shown you how complete his love is for you at every turn? I ask, how do you apply it to your life in your relationship with God? Because very often when we read the Bible, we read stories, or even when we hear about other things and other people, what we often have to do is take some time. Take some time and think about how personal it is. God loves mankind. He loves humanity. He loves all of us. No, he loves you. He knows you by name. He knows your situation. And he knows why he put you in the middle of that storm, that perfect storm. Do you trust him? Do you understand that he's going to bring you through and it is going to be made complete like it's always been? Does my faith in God result in trust or doubt? Does the environment that exists around me respond to my lack of fear or enhance it? This contrast here, a lack of fear or enhancing the fear. You think about, when I say environment, think about where you work, think about where you live, think about your family, think about whatever it is that goes around you on an everyday basis. Those storms, those perfect storms that seem to come up and they're not going away. Do you respond to them with trust? Not trusting in yourself, not trusting in what you can do, not trusting in your strength, your abilities, but do you respond with trust in God? Or are you looking at him and waking him up, talking about, I don't know what's going to happen, I'm worried. God, you can't seriously want me to drown. I know you don't want me to go out like this. And God's saying, what have I always done? What have I always done? Why would I want to hurt you? You go out there and you're disobedient and then you get a boo-boo, you get a scratch, you hurt yourself, you make a mistake. But even in that, it's not to hurt you. The goal here is not to hurt you. The goal here, just like it would be for my children, is to teach you a lesson. It would be to help you to grow. It would be to immunize you. But do we trust in a God that loves us that way? Or do we doubt? Because when we doubt, when we live off of our fear, when we allow our fear to take hold, there's no love in that. There's no faith when we fear. Because it basically says, God, I know who you are and who you've always been and who you are for everyone else, and even what you've demonstrated in my life, but I don't trust you. I don't trust that you mean well. I know you're telling me to go here. I know you're telling me to go there, but I don't trust you. That's what fear is. When God gives us an instruction, he gives us a word, he inspires us, and we don't want to do it because we're afraid. we're saying, God, I don't trust you. Does our faith in God result in trust? Is it strong enough for that? Finally, what immediate or long-term impact can I have on others by taking responsibility for calming the storm in my own life? You know, I'd say this immediate or long-term impact because as we get into being the salt of the earth, we find that the expectation, the responsibility that we have as Christians in being the salt of the earth is that we go out and we do have an impact on others. That we do bring about change. That we make sure that we always understand that it's not just singularly and only about us, but that God wants us to be able to have an impact on others. And yet we can't do that if we don't take responsibility for it. If we're afraid to take risks, we're afraid to go out and be bold, we're afraid to open our mouth, we're afraid to take on challenges. When we are afraid, that means we're not taking responsibility for calming that storm. Now, responsibility for calming that storm doesn't mean you have any power over that storm. But we know who does. And yet, do we own that storm? Do we say, I don't care how bad it gets, I'm still going to have faith in God that he's going to bring me through? I don't care if this goes on for a year or 2 years or 10 years. I've gone through some storms, some 10-year storms. Nothing like a nice, long, enduring storm that just kind of hangs over you. You know, I thought about how, you know, and it's always inspiring when you see this during hurricane season twice a year. But a couple months ago back with the Bahamas. And that storm, it was so powerful, but what was so powerful about it was it just hung over that island. It wouldn't move. It said it slowed down from 5 miles per hour, that's already slow. It said, yeah, well now it's slowed down to 1 mile per hour. And it was just kind of taking its time, dumping all this water. But what was so inspiring was that with all the death and destruction and carnage and flooding and everything that tore down, everybody's attitude was, but you know what? We're going to rebuild. Same thing they said when other storms have hit different places, even in the United States. We're going to rebuild. Do we have that attitude? Because that's what it means to take responsibility of the storm. It says, you know, I trust God that if God wants me to rebuild, fine, he'll have his way. He wanted to tear that building down. He wanted to take my car. He wanted to take my job. He wanted to move me somewhere else. And that's okay. Because I have enough faith in my God who's always been faithful, and I'm going to rebuild. Do we have a faith in a God that allows us to take responsibility for that storm and say, you know what? It's okay what happens. We're going to calm this storm, and we're going to rebuild. Is that who God is to you? Do you know who that God is? If you're someone who's never accepted Christ, who's never been baptized for the forgiveness of your sins, who's never taken the attitude that says, I want to know who this God is. This perfect love that I read about in 1 John chapter 4, I want to know what this perfect love is. Let us as a church teach you. Let us help you. Let us bring you to a place where you can understand for yourself, not based on somebody else's account, not based on what you've heard, not based on somebody you've read about or watched on TV, but for yourself. It's personal. Part of taking that responsibility is saying, I'm going to take responsibility and say, I want a personal relationship with God. Let us help you find that. If you're in that place today, if you need the prayers of the church because you need your faith to be increased, you need to grow. You've been walking around in fear and you're tired of being in fear. Come forward as we stand and sing our song of invitation.
I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore. There my despairing